On a freezing Boston evening, a powerful CEO walked past the hospital where deals and deadlines usually ruled his world. But that night, something stopped him cold. A little girl, no older than 7, sat on a snow-covered bench, her tiny fingers raw and trembling as she carved angel wings into the icy ground. When he asked why, her answer pierced deeper than any winter wind. "So Mommy won't feel alone when she wakes up." In that fragile moment, two lives collided, one built on skyscrapers and success, the other on hope and love. What followed was not just a story about survival, but about rediscovering what it means to be human. If you believe that even in the coldest nights, love can spark miracles, then stay with us. This story might just change how you see tomorrow. Subscribe now to Hidden Echo Stories for more heartfelt tales. The deal was done, the kind of deal that made headlines and stretched city skylines higher. Daniel Whitmore, the man whose name was etched into steel and glass across Boston, stepped out of the boardroom as if walking away from another victory. Applause still echoed faintly in his ears, but it felt hollow, like a sound that belonged to someone else. His assistant hurried behind him, reading off calls and events, but her words blurred into static. He brushed her off gently, requesting the car, then surprising even himself by saying he would walk the first block. The elevator doors closed, leaving him alone with the silence. Outside, winter had smothered the city in white. The streets glistened with ice, the wind pressed against his collar, and the air tasted sharp, metallic, almost too clean. Daniel pulled his coat tighter, hands hidden in his pockets, as his polished shoes cut neat paths through salted sidewalks. The world bustled around him with hurried commuters, traffic signals, and the relentless rhythm of a city that never paused. Yet inside, he felt the familiar weight of emptiness, that echo of loneliness he had carried for years. At the corner near Massachusetts General Hospital, he slowed. The limo waited ahead, engine purring like a patient animal. He almost walked straight toward it, but something tugged at the edge of his vision. Across the street on a frozen bench sat a child. She was small, her coat far too thin for the storm that swirled around her. Her fingers, bare and red from the cold, traced delicate lines in the snow. Daniel frowned. She was not scribbling mindlessly. She was creating shapes, careful and deliberate. As he looked closer, his breath caught. They were wings. She was drawing angels, not with broad strokes of joy like other children might, but with quiet devotion, as if every line mattered. A worn teddy bear leaned against her side, its single remaining eye reflecting the pale streetlight. She worked patiently, sculpting feathers with her fingertips, ignoring the wind that bit at her cheeks. Daniel found himself crossing the street almost without thinking. The closer he came, the more he felt an ache stir inside him, something long buried. He asked softly where her family was. The girl lifted her head, eyes glassy yet calm, carrying a sorrow that did not belong on a child's face. Her voice was a whisper. "I am making angels so Mommy will not be alone when she wakes up." The words landed with the weight of truth that could not be dismissed. Daniel turned his gaze toward the hospital behind her, the windows glowing faintly against the storm. He imagined her mother inside, unmoving, machines doing the work of breath. His chest tightened with a pain he had almost forgotten how to feel. Memories flickered unbidden, his sister Emily, paintbrush in hand, covering walls with murals of wings, declaring that angels came when no one else would. He had not answered her last phone call. A week later, she was gone forever. The cold outside seeped into his bones, but it was nothing compared to the frost settling over his heart. He asked the girl, gently this time, if her mother was inside. She nodded, explaining that the doctors said she was sleeping, but she believed her mother was afraid. That was why she drew the angels. They reminded her mother that someone was waiting. Daniel could barely swallow. The limo door opened behind him, but he could not turn away. He asked her name. "Lily," she replied. Then, after a pause, she looked at him with quiet certainty. "You look like you used to smile a lot." Her words cut deeper than she could know. The snow thickened around them, erasing the noise of the city. Daniel lingered, asking if she should go inside to stay warm. Lily shook her head. The hospital staff would not let her stay unless she was sick. She was not sick. She was waiting. The defiance in her small voice was not anger but a stubborn devotion that felt unshakable. Daniel stared at her chapped fingers, trembling from cold yet still shaping wings, as if love itself could be carved into snow. Something within him cracked. The icy wall he had built over years of chasing towers and ignoring loss. He had built empires, but here sat a child building hope with nothing but her bare hands. He stood there longer than he meant to, caught between two worlds. One was the life he knew, measured in contracts and skyscrapers. The other was unfolding right before him, fragile and fleeting, yet more powerful than anything he had claimed as his own. He should have walked away, slipped back into the warmth of the car, dismissed the moment as a passing curiosity. But he did not. He stayed, rooted by the undeniable truth that this little girl's angels were not just for her mother. They were also for him. Later that evening, Daniel found himself at his penthouse, glass of untouched scotch in his hand, staring at the city spread below. The skyline glowed with wealth and ambition, monuments to his success, yet he felt no pride. All he saw were her small hands shaping wings in the snow. He remembered the sound of her voice, soft and certain, telling him that angels came when someone was waiting. For years, he had lived without waiting for anyone, without believing anyone might wait for him. And yet, a child had spoken words that cracked the silence he had carried inside for so long. He lowered the glass, setting it aside with unsteady fingers. He realized that night that his life, perfectly built and polished, had never once felt alive the way that one encounter had. As snow drifted outside his window, Daniel thought of Emily again, her laughter echoing in the recess of memory, her murals of angels fatting on walls long since painted over. He had buried her memory in dust and regret, convinced himself that moving forward meant never looking back. But Lily's angels had unearthed it all, refusing to let him forget. And for the first time in years, he felt something stir that he had not dared to name. It was not ambition. It was not fear. It was hope, fragile and uninvited, yet undeniable. The next evening, Daniel returned to that corner as if pulled by a force he could not explain. The city streets were the same, blanketed in snow and illuminated by the muted glow of street lamps, yet something felt different. He had spent years walking past scenes like this without a second glance, but now his eyes searched for her. And there she was. Lily sat on the same wooden bench, her teddy bear perched loyally beside her. Her small hands moved carefully across the ground, shaping another angel, this one larger than before. A napkin was tied around the bear's neck like a cape, as if he too was on duty. She looked up when she heard his steps. "You are back," she said simply, as though she had expected him all along. He found himself smiling faintly. "I had a meeting nearby." She seemed to know he was lying but did not call him on it. Instead, she pointed to the fresh wings. "I made new ones, better ones." He crouched down, careful not to disturb her drawings. "They are better," he admitted, his voice softer than he had intended. As she smoothed the snow with her palm, she spoke with quiet conviction. "Sometimes I think if I make them big enough, the angels can see them from far away." Daniel studied her, this tiny person with frostbitten fingers who carried hope as if it were her job. He asked about her mother. Lily's reply was simple. "Still sleeping, but she is trying to find her way back." He wanted to argue with the certainty in her voice, to explain that medicine and chance, not drawings in the snow, determined such things. But the words never came. Instead, he found himself listening, not as a businessman accustomed to control, but as a man slowly remembering what it meant to believe. Her situation unraveled in fragments as they spoke. She did not leave the hospital. The staff allowed her to eat in the visitor's room if she promised not to stay overnight. She slept on the bench outside, curled beneath the weight of the storm, waiting. She spoke these truths without self-pity, as though this was the natural order of things. Daniel's jaw tightened at the thought of her enduring such cold nights, yet what struck him most was her resilience. She had no bitterness, only determination. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder of the gala he was expected to attend, but the glow of the screen felt irrelevant. He slid it back without replying. For the first time in years, he allowed the demands of his world to wait. Then Lily reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She handed it to him with both hands, her eyes searching his face. Daniel opened it carefully. The drawing was of three figures: a woman lying in a hospital bed, a little girl holding her hand, and a man with brown hair and a navy coat standing beside them. The man had wings, not the perfect kind you might see in a painting, but wings made of stone, cracked and heavy, yet protective. They wrapped gently around the child. He stared at it, speechless. His throat tightened as he whispered, "Is this me?" Lily nodded without hesitation. "You came back. That is what angels do." For a moment, Daniel could not breathe. He saw his sister's murals again, those sprawling wings on bedroom walls that she had painted in defiance of despair. And he remembered how he had dismissed her faith as childish. Yet here was a child, a stranger, handing him back the wings he had long ago abandoned. Snow began to fall again, drifting onto Lily's curls. Daniel pulled out his handkerchief, brushing the flakes from her shoulders with a gentleness that surprised him. He folded the drawing carefully and placed it into his coat pocket as if it were fragile glass. His voice trembled as he asked, "Can I come back tomorrow?" She nodded quickly. "But you should bring gloves. The snow hurts." For the first time in years, Daniel laughed, a quiet sound that felt strange in his chest. He promised her he would. As he walked away, he turned once more. Lily was already bent over, tracing new feathers into the snow. That sight followed him all the way home. Days passed, and Daniel found himself returning each evening. Sometimes he brought cocoa or a cookie, sometimes nothing at all, but always he came. He sat with her as she drew angels, listened to her stories, and shared memories he had not spoken aloud in decades. He showed her his sketchbook, long untouched, and with hesitant strokes began to draw again. His first attempts were clumsy, but Lily's laughter softened the edges of his embarrassment. She guided his hand as though she had always been his teacher. Slowly, his pages filled with wings, rooftops, and stars, echoes of his sister's forgotten art mingling with this new bond. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a man defined by empty victories, but someone rediscovering pieces of himself he thought were lost. Nurse Cheryl soon noticed his presence. She saw the CEO with his polished shoes sitting on the cold ground beside a child, sketching, listening, simply being there. At first she was cautious, but Lily spoke of him with such trust that Cheryl's wariness softened. One evening, Daniel asked about Nora, Lily's mother. Cheryl led him through sterile corridors to room 216. He stood in the doorway, looking at the woman whose fragile body lay still under hospital blankets. Machines beeped steadily, her chest rising and falling with effort. In the corner, Lily's drawings were taped to the glass, suns and wings and bright colors filling the sterile space. Daniel's chest ached at the sight. Nora looked impossibly young, far too young to have a daughter enduring the cold outside. Cheryl explained quietly how pneumonia had stolen her strength, how she had no family listed, no one but Lily. Daniel listened, his jaw clenched, his heart unsettled. He returned to the bench that night with new resolve. The bond between Daniel and Lily grew stronger with each passing day. They shared cocoa and paper cups, drew stories in sketchbooks, and spoke in the quiet language of two souls learning to trust again. Lily told him that angels did not always have halos, that sometimes they wore coats and forgot how to smile. Daniel carried those words with him, replaying them during sleepless nights in his penthouse. He found himself spending less time in boardrooms and more time outside that hospital, where a child reminded him that even the coldest winters could hold warmth. One evening, as the city lights flickered across frozen streets, Daniel sat beside her once more. Lily handed him a cookie she had saved, pressing it into his palm with small, cold fingers. "This one is for you," she said, "because you stay." He swallowed hard, unable to find the right words. Instead, he broke the cookie gently, sharing it with her in silence. In that moment, he understood something he had never grasped through all his years of wealth and ambition. It was not power or success that made a life worth living. It was presence. It was staying. It was choosing not to walk away. The hospital had become a second home, though Daniel never admitted it out loud. Each morning, instead of rushing toward towering glass offices, He found himself walking through snow-laden streets toward Massachusetts General. His driver had long stopped asking where he wanted to go. His assistant had learned to soften her voice when leaving messages he rarely returned. Daniel no longer measured his life in contracts signed or towers built, but in the quiet rhythms of beeping monitors, in the sound of crayons scratching across paper, and in the small laughter of a child who should never have had to be this strong. Lily built small worlds wherever she went. One afternoon, Daniel found her outside the ICU, stacking cushions into what she proudly called a fortress. Teddy bears guarded the entrance. A paper mask decorated with stars hung from her face as she explained it was protection from invisible ninjas called germs. He played along, sketching towers with her, allowing himself to laugh without restraint. To the nurses who walked past, it was an unusual sight. A man known for steel and power crouching on the floor with a child, building castles made of pillows. But to Daniel, it felt more real than anything he had done in years. At night, when Lily finally fell asleep curled against his coat, he often sat beside Nora's bed, studying her face. The tubes and machines frightened him less than the stillness, that heavy pause between breaths that carried uncertainty. He spoke softly to her even when she could not respond. He told her about her daughter's stubbornness, about her angels in the snow, about the cocoa that always had to include 3 marshmallows. He confessed things he had never told anyone, that his sister once painted wings across their mother's garden wall, that he ignored her last call, that the guilt of it had wrapped around his life like barbed wire. "She gives me wings too," he whispered once, glancing toward the couch where Lily slept. "Your daughter. She reminds me of everything I thought I had lost." One night when the storm outside pressed heavy against the windows, Daniel leaned closer to Nora's still form. "Come back," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Come back for her. She waits every day in the cold. She sings to you. She draws you angels. She believes in you, and she has made me believe again." His hand wrapped gently around hers, and for a long time there was nothing but silence. Then, so slight he almost missed it, her fingers twitched. His breath caught as he whispered her name. Her brow furrowed faintly, her lips parted, and with a voice rasped from disuse she breathed one word: "Lily." Daniel stumbled toward the couch, shaking the little girl awake. She blinked in confusion until he whispered urgently, "Your mom, she said your name." Lily ran to the bed, clutching her mother's hand with trembling fingers. "Mommy, it is me," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Nora's eyelids fluttered, her gaze unfocused but alive. Slowly, painfully, her hand curled around her daughter's. Lily sobbed with relief, resting her forehead against her mother's arm. Daniel stood frozen, watching the miracle unfold. When Nora's eyes drifted toward him, her words were faint but sharp enough to pierce straight into him. "You came back." Whether she meant him or someone else, he did not know, but it rooted itself inside him like a truth he could no longer deny. In the days that followed, the hospital seemed lighter. Nurses walked with quicker steps. The receptionist smiled more easily. Even the security guard nodded when Daniel passed. Hope had seeped into the sterile halls, carried in part by the child who would not stop believing and the man who had chosen to stay. Daniel arrived each morning with small gifts: warm boots for Lily, a sweater with stars she immediately adored, coffee from Nora's favorite cafe. He helped tape Lily's drawings across the walls of the room until it glowed with color. He brought a lamp shaped like a golden moon and fairy lights that softened the corners of the room. Together, he and Lily transformed the sterile space into a place that felt like waiting for life, not death. One afternoon, Lily handed him another drawing. This one showed a house with smoke curling from the chimney, 3 figures standing hand in hand outside. Above it, in purple crayon, were the words, "My family now." Daniel's throat burned as he traced the stick figures with his thumb. He had spent years constructing buildings meant to scrape the sky, but here, in a child's drawing, was the foundation he had been missing all along. "Do you like it?" she asked shyly. He whispered, "It is the best gift I have ever been given." She hugged him tight, and for the first time in years, he let himself hold on without fear of breaking. Nora's strength returned slowly, like warmth creeping back into a body after frost. Each day her color deepened, her voice steadied. She often watched quietly as Daniel and Lily sketched together, her eyes filled with gratitude and questions she had not yet spoken. One morning, while Lily sat on the floor drawing stars, a man from Child and Family Services arrived. He explained the necessity of temporary guardianship. Daniel had already signed the papers, offering himself as caretaker until Nora fully recovered. Shock crossed her face, then hesitation, then tears she tried to hide. "Why?" she whispered. "You barely know us." Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. "Because I spent years building towers that touched the sky, but none of them ever made me feel grounded. Until now, until her, until you." Lily looked up from her sketchbook with a small smile, as if she had always known this was where the story was leading. Soon after, Daniel took them from the hospital to a townhouse in Beacon Hill, a place he once abandoned but now filled with life. The walls were warm with light, the shelves stocked with books and art supplies for Lily, the rooms arranged not for show but for living. They ate dinner at the sunlit table, laughter mingling with the clink of dishes. Lily's drawings filled the windows and walls, turning the house into a gallery of hope. At night, Daniel stood by her bed as she drifted to sleep. "Do you think families can start in hospitals?" she asked drowsily. He smiled. "They can start anywhere if your heart is ready." She nodded once, whispering, "Then I think we started ours." Winter stretched on, but inside that home there was only warmth. Laughter echoed in rooms once silent. Music played from an old record player, and the scent of baked apples drifted through the halls. Nora regained her strength, Lily thrived, and Daniel discovered that love was not in skyscrapers or contracts, but in paper stars strung across windows, in cocoa with too many marshmallows, in the sound of a child's steady breathing in the night. One morning, Lily carved an enormous angel into the snow outside their home. Beneath it, in crooked letters, she wrote, "Our home." Daniel knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her cheek. "You have been giving me wings since the day we met," he whispered. She giggled, reminding him that he smiled much more now. He looked up at the angel watching over their house and realized she was right. He finally had something worth smiling for. There are moments in life that do not shout, they whisper. They arrive quietly, disguised as cold nights, trembling hands and small voices that refuse to give up. For Daniel, a man who had built his entire existence on steel, deadlines, and applause, it was the fragile devotion of a child that tore down the walls he had spent years constructing. A little girl, no older than 7, sat on a frozen bench and chose to believe that drawing angels in the snow could keep her mother alive. And somehow she was right. It was not the grand gestures that changed Daniel, but the simple ones. The cocoa with extra marshmallows, the crooked drawings folded into his pocket, the quiet moments in a sterile hospital room when a mother's breath steadied because love was near. Each act, no matter how small, carried the weight of something larger than both of them. Hope. Lily believed with the kind of certainty that adults often lose, and Daniel found himself borrowing her faith until it became his own. The miracle was not only that Nora opened her eyes, though that moment lit a fire in every soul who witnessed it. The deeper miracle was what happened to Daniel himself. He discovered that wealth without presence was empty, that success without love was meaningless. He realized that families are not built by blood alone, but by the choice to stay when it is easier to walk away, by the courage to see someone else's pain and hold it as if it were your own. Their story reminds us all that angels do not always appear with halos and glowing wings. Sometimes they show up in the shape of a child with frostbitten fingers and an unshakable heart. Sometimes they wear coats and carry briefcases, forgetting how to smile until someone reminds them. And sometimes, the angels we think we are creating for others are the very ones saving us. If this story touched something inside you, let it be more than a passing feeling. Let it be a reminder that love often comes quietly in the places we least expect. In a hospital hallway, on a snow-covered bench, in the laughter of a child who has lost so much yet refuses to stop believing. Tomorrow is never promised, but moments like these prove that tomorrow is still a gift worth holding onto. Here at Hidden Echo Stories, we believe in sharing tales that heal, inspire, and remind us of the extraordinary power hidden inside ordinary lives. If you believe, as Lily did, that hope can be drawn into the coldest snow and still shine like fire, then stay with us. Subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories, and together we will keep telling the kind of stories that give us wings, even when we forget how to fly.